Today on Energy Contact, our spine, which supports our vertical structure in our nervous system, is molded by our core. And so our core is very literally the basis of our nervous reactions. But even that core is built by the body intellect. So today we're going to see how our body intellect built that nervous system in the first place. We'll look a little bit more at the energy that runs through that nervous system structure, and we'll see how it makes energy contact with our physical selves. So calm your nerves, breathe, and be comfortable, because it's coming up right now on Energy Contact.
I ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping, and I'll keep my mind on better things.
Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a brand new way of seeing yourself and seeing the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making energetic contact with your own self internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. We love to categorize and separate and parse them out, but there's really no difference. And so, all that health and growth and self-improvement take place at the interface, where we take that unseen energetic stuff and make it contact our physical selves. We're presenting on this program a brand new paradigm that is thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move right ahead with that and put up our first slide. Everyone, please know that I am not a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor, and this show is in no way a medical advice show of any kind. I might call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer, and so might a lot of other people. But it's important to know that state, federal, and local governments absolutely do not. There's important information on this slide, so please read it thoroughly and with awareness. We'll leave it up for a couple more seconds. And when you've sort of got it down, if you would, please locate a pencil and paper. Here's why. At the end of this show, we run some credits. And when those credits run, there's contact information for me. I invite you to contact me. I encourage you to do so. But in order to do that, you're going to need my contact information. In order to get that, you're going to need a pencil. And the credits aren't up there very long, so you'll do well to locate that pencil now. All right, everybody got what's on the screen? Here we are. Today's show is show number 30. If you're joining me for the first time today, thank you. Thank you and welcome. I think there's plenty of good information on this show for you, and hopefully it might even be a little bit entertaining. These shows are sequential, they're progressive, they build. So if it's your first time today or one of your first times, there'll be some stuff that you missed. We're talking about things today that we introduced and explained on previous shows. However, I'm doing my very best to make these shows have value on a standalone basis, and I think you'll get a lot of value out of this show. If it is one of your first times today, or your first time, and if what you see piques your interest, well, thank you for that too. And then please look for previous shows. They are airing at later times than this, either here in this neighborhood or perhaps in the different cable areas of your friends. All right, and now it's time for me to introduce my co-host to you. It is with great pleasure that I introduce my co-host Slim. Let's see if we can get Slim on. There's my buddy Slim. Since we're investigating what energy contacts in the physical self, we have to understand a few things, don't we? We have to understand energy, and this show is certainly about energy, but energy does no good out there, out in some nebulous place. We have to understand something about our body, about that thing that the energy contacts. My pal Slim is here helping us do just that. Remember, A body without energy is just a corpse. An energy without a body, well, it might be a number of wonderful things, but none of them are human. All right, so let's move along here. Previously on Energy Contact, we have been discussing the body intellect and the anatomy that it builds. We've seen how the same materials in our brains that give us thought, recall, reason, memory, logic, all that stuff that we think of as specifically brain stuff, we've seen how those same things are in every cell of our body. We've seen how that body intellect builds us, how thought turns into anatomy. Then a few shows back, we started talking specifically about our spine, our main vertical structure, which became the basis for us talking about our nervous system that runs through the spine. So we've been on the nervous system. Within this nervous system, we've seen that there is no difference between our brain and our spinal cord particularly, but in a bigger picture, there's really no difference between our brain, our spine, and our core just in general. This came as no surprise to my longtime viewers. And we've spoken to, or perhaps better to say we've alluded to, a little bit about this mysterious energy that the old Indian mystics call Kundalini energy. We haven't talked much about it, but that's where we're headed. So today, we're going to assemble and integrate all of this nervous system information we've viewed over the past few shows, and hopefully we're going to sum it all up and conclude. Now that we've built a complete model of the physical structure of the nervous system, we're going to look at some of the electricity that runs through it and some of the little things that promote that. We're going to do primarily two things today. We're going to go back into the womb, back to your fetal development, and see how the body intellect constructed the nervous system in the first place. And then we're going to look at some of that little machinery, the micro machinery that facilitates energy flow through the nervous system. But remember, it is not our goal here to understand anatomy, at least not in the traditional sense. What we want to understand is what energy contacts in our physical self. What makes our bodies something other than just a corpse, capable of everything from motion to love to spiritual growth. Ultimately, from there we'll get to an understanding of how we've been blocking that energy, and then we'll unclog it so that we can facilitate that upward flow of that Kundalini energy from the bottom of our core, up through our spines, and right out of the top of our head. So we have a lot of stuff to do today. We have lofty goals, a lot to cover. But first, before we tear into all that, take a moment and breathe and relax. Because now is the part of the show where we get to visualize, where we take that virtual field trip, a journey, if you will, in your mind's eye. And today, our field trip is recreational. We're going to go out and play a ball game. And you get to be the pivot person in this game. So here we go. We're going to get 5 or 6 friends, some buddies, and each of them we're going to give them a couple of baseballs. And they're all going to form a circle around you. So picture yourself here in this field. You're right in the middle, like the hub of a wheel, and they're equally distanced around you in a circle. Me, I'm not playing just yet. All right, so one of them throws the ball to you. Great, you catch it, and you throw it back to somebody else. You turn to another person, and here comes the ball. You catch it and throw that one back to somebody else. Somehow, some way, you always know who's going to throw the ball next. And when you turn around there, the ball's just about in the air already. And so you keep turning, just randomly catching and throwing, and you're in complete control and comfort. But we're going to complicate things just a little bit. Imagine now that the game speeds up. Imagine now that these people are throwing the ball to you at the speed of electricity, which is, for intents and purposes, the speed of light. And then imagine that this high speed poses no problem for you either. And you're just catching and returning without hesitation and without thought and without any drop in speed whatsoever. Okay, we're going to add one more wrinkle to the game. Now I am going to play. Imagine that I'm up above you in a tree, just sitting there on a branch. And now, in addition to throwing things back and forth to some of your folks in the circle, every now and then you have to throw one to me, and then wait for me to throw it back to you, and then throw it back to somebody else. And all of this is still happening at light speed. Imagine you're doing all of this pivot person stuff, and you're doing it effortlessly and tirelessly, and you're having fun. All right, game's over. Let's come back here. And let's do a little bit of review. We've been talking about the nervous system over the past few shows. Let's bring up a slide and take a look at that. The nervous system, in general, can be thought of as the chief administrator of all the body parts and functions. It's doing what you were doing in the middle of that circle playing catch. The nervous system goes through every single part of our anatomy, but it operates from our spine, our brain, and our intestines. We've learned that the nervous system is divided into two main categories. The central nervous system, you see that on the left of your screen there, and the peripheral nervous system on the right. You'll recall that we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves in our brain that connect to the spinal cord, which hooks into another 31 pairs of nerves along the spine. At the spine, we call those the nerve roots. Those are the peripheral nervous system things, the 31 plus the 12 in the brain. Every nerve in your body comes somehow from one of those 43 pairs, from one of those 86 nerves. Look back to the left side of that screen there for a second. At the very top, if you could see it up there in the brain, you'd see some of those cranial nerves. And down at that thing there that looks like a spine, if you look closely, you'll see that it has no vertebrae. So that's your spinal cord. It runs through your spine. And it looks, and in fact moves, a little bit like a snake. All right, so let's come back here. This all hooks in to another completely independent nervous system that we've seen over the past couple of shows. A completely independent brain. That brain comes from way back in our evolution, way back from our evolutionary ancestors. Well, we don't have time to go back to our evolutionary ancestors today, but we are going to go back some. We're going to go back into the womb. We're going to go back to your conception. We want to look at your creation. And we want to understand this nervous system from a different perspective. We want to see how it's made. So, here we are, going back into your womb, back at the time, or back into your mother's womb, I should say, back at the time of your conception. For those of us who were here at the very early episodes of Energy Contact, this will be a review. For the rest of us, I'll try to cover it as briefly yet thoroughly as possible. Okay, at that conception, we have two independent and separate cells that become one. We call those cells Mom and Dad. From that separateness comes the longing for oneness, comes a longing for unity at a cellular level. And that unity is what's going to become you. So at that moment of conception, you are the culmination of unity which has sprung from diversity. At that point, cells are just multiplying rapidly. And they're all exactly the same. They're clones of each other. Let's take a look at another slide. And you'll see here, this is just one of those many cells investigating. Here you can see that dividing cells, they don't know the difference. Everything that's in one of those dividing cells is in the other. There's nothing in one that could possibly be in the other. So, one of those is going to your brain, and one of those is going to your intestines. Everything that's in your brain is in your gut. Everything that's in any part of you is everywhere. So take a minute and just get clear on what part of everywhere you might not understand. Everything is everywhere. Let's come back up here. So we have that deep longing for unification, but now it gives way to even a deeper desire for separation, for specialization. You need to develop arms that know they're not legs, a heart that doesn't want to be your intestines, eyes that don't try to hear. And so, about 2 weeks after your conception, the cells begin not only to multiply, but to divide. In that 2 week period, these cells form little cliques and groups, and then they stop speaking to each other outside of their own little group. These cells are beginning but these cells that are beginning to specialize, at this point, are still exactly the same, and they're infusing that sameness into every other cell. They separate into 3 layers. Don't let the complex names scare you. They are called ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. All it means is outside layer, inside layer, and middle layer. That mesoderm is going to form heart, skeleton, bones, muscle, fascia. The psoas and the pelvis we've talked about, all that stuff that gives you structure, and all that stuff that gives you motion. The endoderm, the inner layer, is your guts, your core, your viscera. Now remember, we've seen that in this viscera, there's also another independent brain in there. Hold that thought. We'll come back with that. Then the ectoderm is the outside layer. It forms our shell. It's our skin and covering, hair and teeth and glands, things like that. But it also includes our brain and our nervous system. So you see now that not only are these two brains we've been talking about independent, but they come from two completely independent systems. Two systems that haven't been speaking to each other since you were about -8 months old. All right. Remember, during this whole time, your body intellect has consciousness. It's aware of what's going on. At some level, you know there inside Mama if you are the answer to a prayer or if you're a mistake. You know if Mom is an angel or a crack addict. If Daddy hits Mommy, well, Daddy's hitting you too. And if Mommy is eating healthy, raw, organic vegetables, well, that's what you're eating. And so, the body intellect responds, and it behaves accordingly. All right, but we don't want to lose touch with this ectoderm, this outside layer yet. We want to see what it's doing with your brain and with your nervous system. Early in that ectoderm development, it begins to subdivide, to divide even further. And it forms a couple of somethings which anatomy people call the neural crest and the neural tube. These are referred to as the neuroectoderm. Makes sense? Don't let the vocabulary throw you. And this is what gives rise to all of your billions and billions of nervous system cells. It's also what gives rise to the brain, the spinal cord, and all those other cool things we've been talking about the last few shows. So, we're moving pretty quick here. Let's recap for a second. We started conception as a blob. That blob after a couple of weeks turns into layers. They're called germ layers. I like to call them the derms. And that's where we start to differentiate. Those derm layers then start to subdivide. And all of them do that. All of the derm layers subdivide. But we're interested today in how the ectoderm subdivides and how from that place the nervous system is born. Why do we want to know all this stuff? And what purpose does it serve? We know that it's not our purpose to learn anatomy from a health class perspective, huh? I fully expect that you'll have forgotten these vocabulary terms before the credits roll. And that's a good thing, because that's not what we're teaching here. We're just doing enough vocabulary to understand the concepts. There's no reason to remember them. We're doing two things today. We're looking at how that nervous system is formed. We've kind of got that part complete. And we're looking at the things that move the electricity through. Why? Why do we want to do that? So we can understand our core, our spine, and our brain, and we can understand how they're all subordinated to this master thing that we're calling this body intellect. Well, why do we want to do that? Because awareness is the birth of growth and control, and there's no control without it. Okay, and how about this Kundalini energy that I keep hinting about? We've barely defined it, but we know that somehow we need to facilitate its upward motion, and that somehow the secret of that health and growth and positive energy is a result of being able to do that. So hang on, we've still got a lot of ground to cover today. Here goes. Now we're back out of the womb, and you're all grown up. We're back here in the ball game, and we're looking for the pivot person. We've been looking at the nervous system for a while now, but we've barely mentioned some basic terms. We need to touch on them just briefly before we can say we're done. When we sliced the nervous system one way, we saw two components, the peripheral system and the central system. Now we're going to slice it another way, and we're going to see two components from a different angle. And these are what we call the sensory system and the motor system. We have a sensory system that's the signals that come from the muscles and the organs and the glands and stuff and go into the central system. And then we have the motor system. Those are the signals that come out from the central system and go out to the muscles and stuff. So we've got a transmitter and a receiver. These are the pivot people. Keep the terms motor and sensory in mind. And the signals themselves we're going to look at too. Those signals transmit via neurons. Okay, neurons. What are they? Well, neurons are just cells, but they are the highly specialized cells of the nervous system. These neurons are specialized for a few reasons, but one is that they have little branches coming out of them, or at least branch-resembling nerves. So let's bring up the next slide and we'll take a look at some neurons here. Nerve cell fibers, which is a synonym for neurons, they're of two kinds. They're dendrites, which conduct impulses to the cell body. The dendrites in that picture on the left, look at the picture on the left, those are the little jaggedy limb-like things, the hair on that little alien there. They're the receivers. And then there's axons. The axons conduct impulses away from the cell body. The axon is sort of the white trunk in there in the middle, the body of our little alien. And that's the transmitters. That big thing up there in the top in the middle with the polka dots, that is the cell body. That is the body of the nerve cell, of the neuron. And that thing that looks like a big eye, well, that's just the neuron. That's just the nucleus. Okay, so let's come back here. Neurons that conduct impulses to the spinal cord and brain, to the central nervous system, are called sensory or afferent neurons. Neurons that conduct impulses from the CNS, the central nervous system, to the muscles and glands and such, those are called motor or efferent neurons. Okay, forget those terms. Each neuron is a separate unit, a separate entity, and there is no anatomic connection between them whatsoever. They don't run in packs, and they don't work in teams. Yet, they constantly communicate and interact. How can that be? Well, they make energy contact. They shoot little electrochemicals and energetic signals across empty space to receptor neurons and other cells. Yeah, says who? Tree-hugging sprout eaters? Is this the stuff of that yogi meditating in the woods that we talk about? No, this is Science 101. They move through synapses. Let's bring up a slide of a synapse. You see there on the left of this screen that is a synapse. A synapse is just the joint, or the point of junction for the transmission of nerve impulses. Remember, wherever there's a transmitter, there's a receiver. And the receiver there is the dendrite of another neuron. The synapse is at the end of an axon, and that axon contains an electrochemical. It's a so-called neurotransmitter. We don't have time to go into neurotransmitters today, and it's not that important. What is important is that it releases sort of what we'll call an electrochemical. It's released through an empty space, and a near quantum leap, it goes into the next cell. And that's what causes everything. The irony is that the sensory system, often this all happens by sending off a signal because our sensory system touches something. And yet that synapse transmits the signal without touching anything. But it does make contact of a sort. It makes an energy contact. There on the other side of that cell, you can see that the dendrites of one neuron, those are those blue things there, are stimulated by many other axons, those little red things coming in there, from many other neurons. All right, let's come back here. Every cell membrane is just the outside wall of a cell. If a balloon is a cell, well, the balloon itself is the membrane, huh? It's the outside wrapper. Every cell membrane carries an electric charge. So inside of you, you're just busting loose with electricity. Electricity that's no different than the stuff in your wall socket. And what is electricity? Well, it's energy. Just outside this neuron, just outside the cell membrane of it, is a bunch of positive and negative ions. And they're just moved around when the sensory system is activated. And they cause the positive and negative poles to flip in this energetic system. And so just boom, all of a sudden things flip-flop, and that causes motion. This, my friends, is electrochemistry, and you are just a big electrochemical reactor. Nerve reactions are electrochemical in nature, and again, that means chemical reactions that cause energy flow. Now, chemical actions desire equilibrium. They desire to come back to stasis, to balance. Just the same way that the body intellect desires to sort of come back to peace and reconciliation. And that is what makes stuff happen. As we go through life, things get pushed off of balance. We get pushed off of balance. And sort of what life is, in a way, is just that constant reapplying ourselves to regain and maintain that balance. That's true physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, and every other way. So those chemical reactions that are going on in you, remember, they're no different than any chemical reactions in any test tube in any lab. In fact, they're really no difference than the chemical reactions that go through in a recipe that, if you're baking something at home that turns the batter into a cake. The energy that your central nervous system uses to send signals is no different than the energy that runs your stereo, your toaster, your oven, and it's no different than the energy that keeps Mars from bumping into Jupiter. Energy itself, at some level, has an intelligence to it, a master plan, an awareness, even though we often are not aware of it. That awareness connects from the brain out to every cell of our body. And you are a creation of this intellect, of this body intellect. All right, so that's about all the time we have for today. And that does sum up what we're doing with the nervous system, but not really everything we're doing with the spine. The next time, we're moving energy right up that spine. But for now, get your pencil. Here come the credits. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.